Welcome in to College Football Overtime. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon, and we have so much to get into because college football season is down to just 1 week. Just 1 week of the regular season. That means the Pac-12 has just one more week of really meaningful existence where every team is playing, and that just feels so strange. The last week of Texas and Oklahoma playing in the Big 12. Last week of all of these other programs who are moving across the country and doing crazy things. And more importantly, the 2023 season is finally coming to a close as we're starting to get some answers to who's going to be playing in their conference title games. We're going to get into all of that stuff today on the College Football Overtime Podcast. We've seen favorites largely hold serve this season. That pretty much continued this week. We did see one major seismic shift, and we're going to get into that, the Jordan Travis injury that leaves the future of the Florida State football team this season in doubt, or at least unclear. But before we get into any of this, because we've got a lot to talk about here on the College Football Overtime Podcast, I want to welcome in my co-host, Abe Gordon. Abe, how you doing, buddy?
We're doing good, man. Another Saturday delivers in the world of college football. You had a trio of great finishes from the noon games, obviously some premier games at 3:30, at 7:30, and some fun stuff throughout the rest of the night as well. So just good. It's one, like you said, man, only one of these bad boys left in the regular season, and then we get into postseason play, whether it be conference championship or college football playoffs after that.
Yep, and once we get into postseason play, that's a lot of fun, and I'm sure we'll get into all of that here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. But right now, we have to go over what we saw in the SEC. We absolutely have to start with our back-to-back defending national champions, the University of Georgia. They go up to good old Rocky Top, where the Volunteers tried to pull out as many stops as possible. They tried to pull the magic card with Dolly Parton. I mean, you bring Dolly Parton there and have her sing Rocky Top, that was going to give you at least a little bit of magic, and it did for one play, 75-yard touchdown. After that, it was pretty much all dogs. They go and they 38-3 run to the end of the game. Neither team scores in the fourth quarter, but it doesn't really matter. Georgia dominates this game. I want to talk to you specifically about something you tweeted at Abe Gordon. Go give him a follow on Twitter. Carson Beck is QB3 in this class, and he threw for 3 touchdowns on the day up there, good old Rocky Top. Brock Bowers had 6 catches in this game. The Dogs' defense stole the show. They dominated Tennessee largely throughout the entire course of the game. Milton tried to throw the ball down the field, and he just missed a few times. I think that if he had connected on 1 or 2 of those plays, then this could have been a different football game. But ultimately, that Georgia secondary has flexed its muscle continuously, time and time again. They got after Joe Milton. They stuffed the rushing attack largely outside of that first carry that went for 75 yards. The offense clicked on all cylinders. They have too many weapons. That offensive line is killer. Brock Bowers, Oscar Delp, Ladd McConkey. I mean, that's before we get into the actual other wide receivers like Ra Thomas and everybody. I mean, this group looks like the true national championship favorite, and they've proved it with their 3rd ranked victory in a row, and their 3rd really definitive ranked victory in a row. Hey, what did you see in this one?
Yeah, I was probably the last one to come around, if we're being honest, on this Georgia team. I was very patient in my hesitancy to put them as the best team in the country because they hadn't looked the way they've looked. But 3 weeks in a row, as you mentioned, 3 ranked opponents, 2 at home, 1 on the road. I don't have any qualms or doubts about saying it at this point. They are the best team in the country. Now, they do it differently than they've done it the past couple of years, leaned heavily on defense. Now, they still got a pretty good defense now, but this is certainly a team that's led by, in my opinion, now the country's best offense. May not be the most explosive. I don't care if they're the most high scoring. I think they're the best offense. If you told me I needed one drive, 85 yards, and someone's got to go score, I would take Georgia's offense over anyone else's in the country. They have this great combination of explosiveness and efficiency. And that has allowed them, in my opinion, to be the best offense in the country. Carson Beck is I mean, the way he's developed over the course of the year, the questions we had leading in from the season, how's this guy going to fare replacing Stetson Bennett, to where we are now? Well, this guy may be the best passer in the country. And statistically, I understand other guys have more yards. Other guys maybe have a better completion percentage. but the whole package with Carson Beck, it really is there. The offensive line makes it easy for him because he is very well protected, and that obviously benefits the run game as well. But look, this is a situation where if we're going to nitpick, like maybe don't give up another touchdown on the opening drive of the game. That's certainly
Opening
something
touch.
yeah. Well, in this situation, it wasn't literally the first offensive play, but I think they'd give up a touchdown on an opening drive like 6 straight games, 5 straight games. So, that's something to focus on. I know we asked that question throughout the week. What can you do to start faster defensively? I mean, we started pretty fast defensively after that. I mean, it was a complete shutdown mode. So, look, this is the best team in the country. It's going to be very tough to defeat them. And the one thing you mentioned about Joe Milton hitting a couple of deep threats, and I kind of want to flip a little bit. The thing about this defense, and specifically the secondary, which is loaded with talent, you may beat them on a certain route or in certain coverages, but they don't lose guys in coverage. There aren't guys running wide open. Again, you may beat them with a double move, something like that, but they don't lose guys. That's what you see Texas take advantage of, Alabama take advantage of. It's going to be so difficult for these teams that are big play, deep ball offenses to hit against Georgia because they don't lose guys. They might get beat. You might have a window, but there aren't guys running wide open like what we saw on the Dylan Bell touchdown pass, where a guy's just completely lost in coverage and there's no one within 10 yards of him. Georgia's secondary doesn't do that. That's why I think they are so difficult to hit big plays on, outside of obviously the 75-yard run yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, it's just I think your comment saying that they might be the best offense in the country, actually, the more you explained it, the more sense it kind of made.
Yeah.
Because I think the casual observer, and this is not necessarily a wrong answer, you could say Washington, you can say LSU, and those are fine answers. I think that both of those would be fantastic. But the thing is, those teams can't beat you on the ground in the same way that Georgia can. Well, I guess Washington can, of course, but Michael Penix also, they're more reliant on like a handful of players. I think that's really what I was trying to allude to. Jaden Daniels is, of course, the cog in the machine. He makes everything go for LSU. Michael Penix is that way for Washington. I don't necessarily see any one player that is the definitive reason that Georgia is really, really good. And before like the first half of the season, you probably could have said it's Brock Bowers. And that's a fine answer. And I think it's a perfectly fair thing to say. After he goes down for 3 weeks or 4 weeks where he doesn't play at all and the offense doesn't miss a beat. And I mean, like almost, I don't want to say it even got better, but statistically it did look better because you return Ladd McConkey. And there's just, because you can go to so many different directions, this offense can't be beat in any one way. Because if you want to take away the pass, they'll run the ball. I mean, and they can do that at a high level. They are, I think at the beginning of the season, the conversation that I always have is when I'm trying to pick teams that are actual contenders, I ask the question, what are you elite at? Because you have to be elite at something. This Georgia team is damn near elite at everything. And I don't think that there's any other team in the country that can really say that. I mean, Michigan, perhaps you could say that, but the two best teams they played so far this year, J.J. McCarthy has kind of drifted off, and he hasn't looked nearly as effective. And I know we're going to get into some more Michigan conversation here later in the show, so I'll save some of that discussion for when we talk about Michigan. But some of what we saw from them, their dominance looked a little less dominant once the competition started upping. And maybe that's just where we are in the season. Maybe that was part of the game plan. I don't know. But Georgia just continues to elevate their game, and they always seem to find that extra gear that most teams just don't have. And I think that's really what set them apart this season. We saw that against Tennessee in a big way.
It's also just a situation where you do think they're going to run into some tough competition for one reason or another. And it's not that these teams are bad, but they just can't match up. And so, like, you see what they do to Missouri, and that was a competitive game, sure. And they obviously blow out Ole Miss. Sure. They put an end to, the offense, what's going on there. But it was a different story on Saturday. You are going on the road. You are going into a hostile environment. There are situations you hadn't really dealt with against another ranked team this season, and it just didn't matter. Like you're down 7-0, you get boat raced on the first play. Like none of it matters. Like they just wiped the slate from that first play. They showed up to play on offense. They went right down. You get some points on the board. You're off and running. You get a stop. You you use the ball right before, half ball after, and the game's over. And it's just like I don't know what you do to challenge these guys because they are so good on the offensive end. You you feel like at any given time they're going to put together a drive. Like it doesn't feel like there's much you can do to stop them and what they do on offense. And then on defense, they'll give up some points here and there. Like we've seen it throughout the season a little bit, but like you're not scoring 30 on this team. And so it just, you've been asking for a month and a half now, like what's the path to victory against this Georgia team?
Yeah.
No one's had an answer. Tennessee didn't have an answer. I don't have an answer. It's going to be really interesting to see, going into the SEC title game. Obviously, Alabama feels like a threat. I like the way their offense is playing, but like, what if we watch the same thing? Like, what if we watch Alabama go down opening drive, score, and then nothing? And it's not that inconceivable to think that Georgia could shut down the Alabama offense. I mean, what if we do that to in the playoffs against, let's just say, Michigan? Like, J.J. McCarthy threw 8 passes against Penn State, and they won the game. Like, they barely beat Maryland a week. I mean, like, it's just I don't know who's beating this team right now. That's what's the most interesting thing is I thought they'd be in the discussion at some point in the year. I didn't think I'd be like very clearly team to beat mode for Georgia at any point this season. I didn't know if they would get there. In my opinion, though, they are there.
Yeah, I mean, they can do a little bit of everything, and they can do a little bit of everything really, really well. Alabama, and I know we're going to get into that discussion here coming up in the next week or so. Now that we have a definitive decision as to who's playing who, that's going to be a fascinating matchup because Alabama does a lot of things well. I mean, hell, they're Alabama. Like they are the standard bearer of college football and have been for the last 2 decades or so. But it feels like that game, the SEC championship in particular, could be a sort of changing of the guards, if you will, because if they can get past Alabama for a second time, and if they can do so in convincing fashion, I know we saw them win the national title game against Alabama. That felt like the moment where they got the monkey off their back and like, hey, we've arrived on the national stage. But if they can beat Alabama in that title game and they can do it convincingly, I think the rest of the college football world will be forced to admit that this is Georgia's they are the top of the mountain. I know that they're back-to-back national title winners, but at the same time, it does feel like they have Alabama's had their number largely throughout this Kirby Smart era. So that's something that I really want to see in that SEC title game, and I think it's going to be a very interesting thing to watch. But Abe, I do quickly want to move on. Do you have any other thoughts there? Or
I was just one last thing on Georgia. I've always said when people ask me, is Georgia building a dynasty? You're not a dynasty till you win a national championship with a second quarterback. Because winning it 2 in a row with Stetson is one thing. We've seen a lot of programs do that. But when you bring in that second quarterback to get it done, I think you enter a different realm. So that's all I'd say to that in regards to Georgia and the dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, 50% of your roster that won the first one, at least 50% is not here from the first one.
Yeah,
they would be the first. They would be well on their way to being the first three-peat national champion since Minnesota did it in the 1930s. I mean, the list of accolades and accomplishments that Georgia has on its resume is unprecedented in this day and age of college football, at any age of college football, really. And that's a testament to just what Kirby Smart has done and the sleeping giant that he awoke in Athens, Georgia. But I want to talk about the game that happened in Como, Missouri, and the Florida Gators. I know this is your Gators, man, and the stars were shining for Missouri. Luther Burden came up in a big way, 9 catches, 158 yards, including the catch that set up the game-winning field goal on 4th and 17. It felt like Florida did just enough right. I mean, if you tell me, and I look at the box score, I can see the rushing attack was working. Like if all I did was look at one stat and I saw that Florida ran the football for 261 yards, I would have said, damn, Florida Gators won this football game. But I think we saw something from Missouri, a game that they played kind of sluggish, the game that really largely they weren't the better team on Saturday. They looked like the better team when it all mattered most, when it was all said and done on the scoreboard. And that's just a testament to the type of team that Missouri is this year. Brady Cook had a good game, 326 yards and a touchdown. Cody Schrader, 148 yards and a touchdown. I want to say it's like his fourth or fifth straight 100-yard rushing game in the SEC, and he's just one of the biggest reasons why they've done what they have done. It is worth talking about. Graham Mertz does suffer a significant collarbone injury. Backup quarterback Max Brown came in to finish the game, played pretty well, but it just was not enough for Florida. It was kind of a heart-wrenching loss, if you ask me. Harrison Nevis hits his second game-winning field goal of the season, but man, oh man, that was a tough way to lose for Florida.
Yeah, this game-winning kick for Mevis a little bit easier than the one against Kansas State. But look, when you watch the game, Florida had to work much harder to get points on the board. Missouri still was able to strike with big plays, stuff like that. And you hate to break it down into one play, but there is a late run from ETN where if he gets down in bounds, you're looking at a completely different game the last minute and a half, as opposed to he got out of bounds. Missouri was able to keep a timeout they very sorely would need as they tried to get back into it on offense. It'll be interesting to see, moving forward for Florida, because this felt like a game that could have got them into bowl eligibility. Now they still need one against Florida State, one that will seemingly have neither starting quarterback on the field. As you mentioned, Max Brown, a little bit different than Graham Mertz, and obviously it was kind of panic mode, so you're probably just stuck with what Max Brown was comfortable with, a lot of read options and some quarterback runs, stuff like that. You wonder how much more the offense will open up when he's got a week of practice to get work in with the starters, stuff like that. So, it's a really tough loss for Florida, only because they needed it so badly for bowl eligibility. But again, Drinkowitz and Brady Cook and Luther Burden and Schrader and the gang, when push came to shove and they needed a scoring drive late, they got it. So hat tip to them on what continues to be an absolutely outstanding season for the Missouri Tigers.
Yeah, and one thing that I did see specifically from the Florida Gators in this game is this team hasn't quit, and I think that's a really good sign. That's a really good sign for Billy Napier's tenure at Florida. I think I saw that the players want to play for him. They came back from a 30-21 fourth quarter deficit. They played really good red zone defense. They only allowed 2 touchdowns and 6 trips for Missouri, and with a guy like Luther Burden and Cody Schrader in the backfield, I mean that's a big deal. So I'm seeing progress from Florida, and I see them continuing to fight for Billy Napier. And then you add in the really strong recruiting class. It makes me really believe that Billy Napier's job is safe in Gainesville, and I absolutely believe it should be. I think it'd be a foolish decision to fire him, despite the record. Even if they miss a bowl game this year, I think that would be just a disastrous decision in Florida if you fired him. But I'll say it again. I mean, Missouri has just had a magnificent season. I mean, these guys have come from the depths of the SEC, a team that nobody took seriously for a very large portion of the season. They had the big win against Kansas State with a 61-yard field goal, and that seemed to change everything for Eli Drinkwitz's team this year. And now they're set up for their first New Year's Six bowl appearance since 2014 when they played in the Cotton Bowl. Last time they played in the SEC championship game. Look, this is a great season. It's a great team, and I'm really excited to see what Missouri has done with it this year.
Yeah, one quick thought on the comments you had about Napier, and that is simply fans and even media to an extent, but specifically fans and fan bases refuse to honestly admit where a program's at when they make a quarterback change. I don't think people were truly honest with themselves about where the Florida Gators were as Napier took over. So yes, there was a little step forward. Now there's a step backward unless you beat Florida State, which is certainly possible. But let's be real about where this program is at. There is the momentum forward that you see. Win or lose, you can still build momentum even in losses. The fact that you mentioned these kids are still playing for their coach says a lot. And I'll be honest, I said before this game, I think it's more likely they beat Florida State than it is they beat Missouri. They came very close here against Missouri. And obviously the quarterback situation has changed for both schools. I would not at all be surprised if they're able to beat Florida State to finish out the season.
Yeah, and look, if they did that, that would be just a magnificent finish, and all would be forgiven in Gainesville if he was able to pull that out. And speaking of something where all can be forgiven if you beat your rival, oh my God, what happened in Auburn? I mean, this is just an incredible game. I didn't actually catch any of this game because I was heading over to Georgia Tech down to the Flats to cover the Yellow Jackets. And then I just kept checking in on this scoreline, and I just kept seeing the Aggies. No, not the Texas A&M Aggies, the New Mexico State Aggies. I kept seeing their score go up, and Auburn just stayed the same. The Auburn Tigers paid $2 million, or nearly $2 million. They were 25.5-point favorites, and they lose. And Hugh Freeze's team actually loses to New Mexico State for the second year in a row. Both times, they were 20-plus point favorites. I mentioned that actually on the last podcast that we did on Thursday. I said, hey, don't be surprised if New Mexico State gives them a game. I didn't think that they would win, much less win by 21 points. I mean, Abe, this is the biggest moment for the state of New Mexico since Breaking Bad. I mean, this is a big deal for the New Mexico State Aggies. This is a massive, massive win. Jeremy Kill, the head coach of New Mexico State, has them with back-to-back 7-win seasons. When the program only had only won 7 games, just twice in their 54-year history. He's done a marvelous job with the Aggies, and honestly, credit to him. They turned a season that started with a loss to UMass into one of their best in program history.
Well, look, this goes right back to what I said about Florida and Billy Napier, doesn't it? Like fan bases refuse to admit where a program is when they're making a quarterback change. And Auburn, I think, showed you in this game, they were probably a little lower than people want to openly say they were. Now, I said on the flip side, this is what you bring in Hugh Freeze to do. Solidify your program, find some solid ground, some solid footing so you don't lose these games. I didn't think that would happen this year. I thought he would get through it this year and then you take steps forward, but clearly I was wrong. And look, New Mexico State, they got a head coach in Jerry Kill that's coached some big-time football. This is not a lifer at the low levels. Some newer fans may forget about his time in the Big Ten, and he had some really good teams and some really big wins in the Big Ten. So it's a frustrating loss, but all in all, now you know, I mean, in your first year under Hugh Freeze, you have no quarterback. This is the sort of game you lose at home. Now you know what your bottom level is, and you have to build from here. But I was surprised because, like I said, this is the reason you bring in Hugh Freeze, is to solidify and not lose games to teams like this. And New Mexico State's good. They're like 8-4 or whatever it is. But you can't lose this game if you're Auburn. And so I understand the frustration of the fan base. I'll say you can hope to see some positive momentum, but this is a really bad one, even for a coach in his first year.
Yeah, I mean, you lost by 21 points at home. I'm sorry. Like, the New Mexico State almost covered the spread that you were supposed to cover,
right?
In a home game. I mean, that's humiliating. It's embarrassing. There's no way to sugarcoat this. And if it wasn't a coach in his first year, I'd be looking at a potential firing. Because this is a coach who's fallen asleep at the wheel. Generally, if it's not your first year, this is a team that was clearly looking ahead to its arch rival next week. It's a disaster. It's embarrassing. Auburn should be humiliated. This is the worst loss that an SEC team has had since 2016. I want to say South Alabama beat Mississippi State. I mean, that's just terrible company to be in, and it is just an embarrassment to what this program was and is even. I mean, it's like, look, you're looking ahead to a really good Alabama team, and I understand it's big brother in the state. It's a big deal, and of course, that game matters more than anything. And obviously, you win next week, and all is forgiven. You play a really good game next week, and all is forgiven. But look, the Aggies held you to 213 yards of offense. Like, what? You rushed for more. They rushed for more than 200 yards. That's embarrassing. And if that team is doing that to you, I fear for people. I fear for this team next week, because Alabama is a team on a mission, and I'm actually very concerned about what that game could turn into. But of course, rivalry games go crazy, and I don't know. I'll save a lot of that, a little more of that discussion for when we get into it on Thursday. Abe, I do want to move into something we saw in the SEC East. South Carolina continues its quest for a bowl game. 17-14 win over Kentucky. Coach Stoops called this one of the more embarrassing losses. I think that was a little harsh. South Carolina seems to play a little bit better at home. They hadn't scored less than 37 points this season at Williams-Brice Stadium. They didn't need 37 on Saturday. They scored 17, and that's enough for a win.
Yeah, this was an ugly game. Neither team got much going, but at the end of the day, the best player on the field made the difference, and that was Xavier Legette, the receiver for South Carolina. He caught the first touchdown of the game. He caught the last touchdown of the game. Came close to 100 yards receiving in a game where neither offense was getting much going. Ray Davis, Kentucky running back, didn't get a lot going. He did get a touchdown, but I think he was under 70 yards. Devin Leary continues an incredibly disappointing season or comes close to wrapping up an incredibly disappointing season with a 50% completion percentage. Look, these are not good teams, neither one of them. But I think it is boy, I mean, I don't want to go like big picture. Like, did this save Shane Beamer's job? Like this sort of win? Like, I don't think they're going to beat Clemson next week. So they're probably
I don't think he's fired either way
on a bowl. But yeah, I mean, this was not a pretty picture. Neither fan base should be pleased or positive moving forward after this one.
No, I don't think there's necessarily a positive thing to make from this game. Defense played well. South Carolina's had some pretty piss poor defense this season, and I mean that's really the only nice thing that I can say about this football game.
How do you grade when a defense plays well versus the other offense?
I don't know if it's no
defense. Good. Like I know what you're trying to say, but I just hesitate to give credit here. That's all.
Yeah, I mean it's a pretty brutal football game. But, I mean, I do want to give them credit. They've won 3 straight games ever since losing to Texas A&M. So they lost 3 straight. You had that debilitating fourth quarter loss to Florida. Then you lose a tough game to Missouri where they controlled that game. And then you go on the road for a second week in a row and lose to Texas A&M. And they've rebounded it in a nice way. Yes, two of those wins were Jacksonville State and Vanderbilt. Who cares? Win's a win. And look, it has heated up enough for rivalry week. We counted them out last year. And I think it would be a fool's errand to do that this year. But it's like, at the end of the day, Ray Davis, you held him to 61 yards. 31 of those came on one play. It's good defense, because Kentucky has an identity. If you had told me that South Carolina was only going to score 17 points, I would have told you that Kentucky probably ran away with this football game. So I'll give credit to where credit is due. But you did mention one thing, and Abe, I do want to get to this before we move out of the SEC. Sam Pittman, according to a report on Sunday, he is going to be retained as the head coach of the Arkansas Razorbacks. I feel like this is as much a reaction to what's going on over just west of them in College Station with Jimbo Fisher. I think they did some due diligence ahead of it, and they determined that they didn't want to get into bed with potentially the same list of crop of head coaches that Texas A&M could potentially be hiring. And is that an overreaction, or do you think I have a point?
I've always felt that teams should understand where they're going to rank in the list of jobs if they come open. And you got a report of UCLA, and I know we'll get to that. They got a big win on Saturday, so we'll see if that job comes open. But you've got some jobs that are already going to be ahead of Arkansas, so you're really not getting your pick of the litter. You're getting pick of what's left. And look, you got a nice win yesterday. Obviously, you're playing, Florida International. But I think that sometimes patience is to be rewarded. I don't love the comments about like, hey, the kids loved hearing that we were going to keep them, so let's keep them. Like that seemed like an odd time to mention like the players like their coach. Like, yeah, they do, obviously. But look, you're pushing it down the line. We'll see if you can find something, hit lightning in a bottle. But you're probably having this discussion next year, right? Like the schedule is only getting tougher. So maybe you're just keeping with Pittman as you try and feel out the landscape of the new SEC and kind of get some ground and footing. But it was an odd decision. It seemed like an obvious time for a coaching change. But look, we're all big fans of Sam Pittman here. We hope he can turn it around because he's probably only going to be given one more year to do so.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing. It's just for a long time this season, he felt kind of like a dead man walking.
Yeah.
But Sam Pittman's a popular guy over there in Arkansas, so I think people like him. People cheer for him. People want him to win, and the locker room likes him. They haven't lost. He hasn't lost the locker room. I think they support him. I mean, but you also have to factor in the reality that they had as much talent as anybody in the country in that backfield between KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders, and it just never took off. And I don't know what the full reason for that was. I don't know if that was coaching. I don't know if it was just I don't know if it was us, the media, who just were a bit overzealous with what those players were or could be. But Arkansas has consistently been the most disappointing team in the SEC this year, or at least one of the most disappointing teams in the conference. They have woefully underperformed. And I like Sam Pittman. I've been a big fan of his going back to his days at the University of Georgia. He's a fun guy. I really enjoy just his demeanor. I've interacted with him at SEC Media Days on numerous occasions, and he's just a great guy, and I root for him. But this decision felt a little strange to me. Do you really think it's going to get better next year? I don't know why you think it's going to improve next year.
I think they're just trying to feel out the new. Yeah, I think they're just trying to feel out how things are going to look with the new entrance into the conference and let it settle a little bit and then just go. Yeah, but I can't imagine he does a good enough job next year to then keep it moving forward.
Yeah, I guess. Look, I'm happy for the guy. I'm glad he's sticking around because I enjoy his commentary. He's a fun guy, and just in general. So I hope he sticks around for a little while, and I hope he finds some more success next year as the head coach of the Arkansas Razorbacks. But Abe, I do want to move into the ACC quickly, and we have to start with the biggest news that hit college football last week. I mentioned when we started the podcast that we really haven't seen a lot of seismic changes in college football this year. No real big upset losses outside of maybe Clemson losing week 1 to Duke, the way that we saw that happen. Outside of that, we really haven't seen major underdogs win football games. And we saw we just saw no seismic shifts in that sense. I think we did on Saturday when Jordan Travis went down with just a horrifying leg injury. And I hate for it. I hate that for him. He's had just such a magnificent season. The way that he continued to play in the absence of many of his stars, the way that he continued to fight for Florida State. I mean, this is a guy who was being booed a few years ago to now being a potential Heisman hopeful. And he led the charge for the resurgence of Florida State football. He's the personification of what a college quarterback can mean to a football program. And my heart just goes out to him and to that Florida State program. But I do want to keep it to the football. Like, they were trailing North Alabama by 13 points. They looked like they had fallen asleep at the wheel. They were looking ahead to their matchup with Florida next week. Maybe they just kind of took this game for granted. But they do score 58 unanswered points in the absence of Jordan Travis. Backup Tate Rodemaker. I mean, he's a Valdosta kid, went to a great high school. This is really the first opportunity that we've seen Rodemaker, and I guess we'll see him again next week against the University of Florida and that fun matchup that those two teams have. But God, it hurts. It just sucks that Jordan Travis is down.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, but there's no pity from any of the teams that they would potentially face in Florida or Louisville or potentially in the college football playoffs. I mean, they've got to get Rodemaker up to speed in this offense. This is a guy who's in his fourth year with the Florida State Seminoles. Has been used very sparingly. Well, I think he threw like 2 passes one year. I don't know if it counts. Might have redshirted officially, but. Yeah, he's got to get up to speed because they've got an offense to run. And as much as you like to think that they can out-talent some guys, they've got playmakers you've got to get the ball to, and not by turning around and handing it off. I mean, you've got to find a way in big games to get the ball to Johnny Wilson and Jaheim Bell and Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman didn't register a catch in this game. Or excuse me, he did. He had a touchdown catch, 53 yards. I mean, you've got to get your playmakers involved even more now. It becomes more about them than it does about the quarterback. To me, the difference here for Florida State is this is no longer about spreading the ball around and getting everyone involved. And this is about letting your best players, and specifically because of the part of the season you're in and the teams you're about to face. And I know Florida right now is not very good, but they're going to be game come Saturday. And then obviously Louisville's top 10. And anyone you would play in the college football playoffs are going to be top 10. You're going to need your playmakers making plays. This is not an offense that can run spreading it around, getting everyone involved and that sort of thing. You've got to get more out of Coleman and Wilson specifically. They're supposed to be, along with maybe LSU, like the best, and Ibuka and 18 up there at Ohio State. I mean, these guys are in discussion for best wide receiver duo in the country. They need to show that and be there for Roadmakers so you can make it easy on him in your next couple of games, at least until he gets a little bit more comfortable. And then the other aspect of this is the offensive line. You're going to have teams blitzing this guy. There's no doubt about it. Teams are going to look to put pressure on this guy, speed him up before he gets comfortable, both in the game, in a rhythm, but also just with the offense and stuff like that. So it's really about, for Florida State, understanding what changes are about to happen and how you have to address, one, how teams will attack you differently themselves, but also how you need to adjust your own offense to run. In terms of Jordan Travis, this was your, in my opinion, prototypical outstanding college quarterback career. This is a guy that probably doesn't have many chances at the next level, but he had a chance to become a legend at Florida State. And not that he's not a legend now, but you know, I think a lot of people respect him sticking in the program, helping to turn around the program along with the head coach through some really troubling times to get them to where they are now, a game or two away from potentially being in the college football playoffs. But beyond that, the legacy that he would have had could have been built in those games, could have been built beating Louisville, could have been built in the college football playoffs. And the unfortunate aspect of this, and look, his bones will heal, but he'll never have the opportunity to become the legend that was potentially on the table in front of him. And that really hurts to see, because there's so many guys like him that mean so much to their college program that never have a real shot at the next level. And I'm not saying he won't be on a practice squad or bounce around, but this guy was never going to be a starter in the NFL. I think it just being honest, at least in my opinion. Yeah. So that's what hurts from that aspect, is he's one of these college guys who meant so much to their program, and you just don't get to see him play it out when they had all of it in front of them, including an ACC championship, their first in quite a while, and potentially the college football playoffs.
Yeah, and my heart goes out to him. I don't know what Florida State looks like without him, just in general. I know this is a team.
Well, it's tough to grade against who they played yesterday.
It's impossible.
You're so much better than man for man. It doesn't even translate.
You could roll your practice squad out there, and you should win by multiple double.
By the way, we saw Texas A&M did that. They got a fumble. I don't know.
Hey, we love that. That was a really cool moment for Texas A&M on Saturday. But I hesitate to really prognosticate anything for Florida State at this point now without Jordan Travis on the roster, and I just don't know what's going to happen with him. But I do want to continue down because
let me ask you real quick on Florida State.
Sure.
We know how the committee likes to weigh things and value things and judge things, whatever. Let's say Florida State does beat Florida and does beat Louisville. With a backup in Rodemaker, are they still locks, in your opinion, if they're an undefeated ACC champion? Are they still a lock in the playoff for you?
I don't know. That's a tough situation. It's impossible to answer that question right now. I think we need to see what they look like.
You want to see them against Florida and Louisville? Okay.
I want to see them against Florida and Louisville.
It's a cop-out answer, but it's a good cop-out answer, so I'll allow it.
It is a cop-out. It is a cop-out because
but it's a good one, so I'll allow it.
I don't know if they're going to stay undefeated. I just don't. I for real. I really. Jordan Travis was so important to
Yeah.
what Florida State was as a program. He was the lifeblood of that team. And I don't want to call this a hot take or whatever. They're not undefeated. They're not going to stay undefeated. They will lose one of their next 2 games. If I have to go out and make a pick, I think Florida beats them next week.
Yeah.
Where's the game being played? I haven't looked yet.
I'm pretty sure
in
it's
Gainesville?
Yeah, I think it's at Gainesville. But remember, I mean, look, Florida's dealing with the same thing as well with Max Brown.
Yeah, but
And I'm just
Grant
saying.
Mertz is not what Jordan Travis is. I think they want to come in and run the ball. I think they're going to give him a hard time. And then it's either that game against Florida or a really confident opponent with Louisville, And
Yeah, I agree.
I just don't know what this team is without their leader. I don't know what this team is without the number 1 dude on their roster, which is and has been all season, Jordan Travis. And my heart breaks for them. And it sucks that this could end up being a season of what could have been.
Yeah.
A season where you start with just such a resonating victory against LSU. You go on the road and get that game against Clemson that was just they had been snake bit in that game for so long. And then when it seemed like everything was working against them, it just seemed like everything changed. And that's sort of where their season flipped. And it sucks that it could end this way. Granted, it hasn't ended yet. We could see the backup Roadmaker, like he could come in and be a beast. Like we could see a Tom Brady-esque type of performance. I don't know. Am I assuming that's going to happen? Of course not. But crazier things have happened. But Abe, I do want to quickly move into Louisville because that is who we're going to be seeing in the ACC title game after they take down Miami. They didn't look really good. It really didn't, but the offense showed up in a big way, despite Jamari Thrash and Gerard Jordan with nagging injuries. 14 different players touched the ball on offense. That's a testament to Jack Plummer and what Jeff Brom has done in his first season at Louisville. But Thrash and Jordan, their health is going to be something to monitor moving forward. Just 9 carries for Gerard Jordan. The team still ran for 162 yards and 2 touchdowns against a pretty stout Miami defense. And then Thrash only had the 1 completion. So I think it's going to be very interesting to watch what this team is next week against a Kentucky squad, which, again, we're moving into rivalry week, and it's hard to predict anything on these games because all of these matter so much on such a major scale, and maybe that sweeps into somebody's favor. But look, huge first season for Coach Jeff Brom at Louisville. This is their first ever ACC championship berth, and now they're playing a Florida State team that just lost a starting quarterback. So maybe a New Year's Six game is in play for Jeff Brom at Louisville.
Yeah, and that's what you've got to be focused on. You can't look ahead to the ACC title game. You can't look ahead. Obviously, I don't think this team has any conference college football playoff prospects, despite some people hoping chaos prevails. I don't see that. But New Year's Six, you got to win both of these, not just the Florida State game to get there. And so it'll be very interesting. This was not an overly well-played game, but when they had to have it in the fourth quarter, Plummer was pretty good, and some of the playmakers for Louisville got the job done. Obviously, we saw how things went with a long touchdown pass to the right side. Obviously, pure speed gets it done for Louisville. And then also how it ended with Restrepo catching a Hail Mary at the 3 or 4 yard line and no one there to lateral to, and obviously couldn't fight through about 4 or 5 tackles to tie this thing up. So very, very fun ending to this game. I think this was an apropos finish. So I thought Louisville's been the better team this season. The teams did look relatively evenly matched yesterday, but I'm glad this is the way it played out. Louisville's had the type of year that deserved to be representing in an ACC championship game with the potential of more to come. But you do get that game against Kentucky a week from now. You mentioned, I think it's a big deal for Louisville that game is at home. I think that goes a long way to helping decide that one for them.
Yeah, and that was something I mentioned on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, college football game time. I mentioned specifically that, look, this Louisville team doesn't tend to play very well away from home. That kind of served the inverse on Saturday against Miami. Of course, they didn't look like they ever were able to pull away completely like they have whenever they play at home, but they did all that they needed to do. They lock up their bid to the ACC title game. Abe, I quickly want to move on to Clemson and North Carolina. Clemson continues to just turn around their season. I think they have found a new gear, especially on offense. The defense was pretty good. They were playing against likely the best offense in the ACC in North Carolina. Omarion Hampton still had a pretty good day. I think he might have a chance to be one of the best running backs in the country this year. 178 yards for him, 2 touchdowns. Drake May was pretty damn good. Still wasn't enough because Clemson has found an identity on offense. Cade Klubnik just play conservative, spread the ball around. You had 6 different players with 2 or more receptions. 5 of them had more than 20 yards receiving. And then you run the ball effectively. Will Shipley had 126 yards and a touchdown. Phil Maffa, 84 yards and a touchdown. You have an identity. That's all I've been asking for from Clemson. Play good defense, run the ball effectively. Cade Klubnik, don't make the debilitating mistake, and don't turn the ball over. That's a recipe for a win for Clemson.
Yeah, speaking of debilitating mistakes, look, Omarion Hampton had a good game. He also had a bad game. 2 very costly fumbles, one at the start of the game, and another one, we got caught by the touchback rule as he was going into the end zone. It would have given North Carolina a 14-0 lead. It would have been a totally different game. He fumbles as you're reaching for the pylon. Ball goes out of the back of the end zone. And it's Clemson ball. And it was all Clemson from there on out. And it was just, I had picked this as my upset special. I thought I was headed to glory as Omarion Hampton raced down the sideline. And if he scores there, I think we were talking about a totally different result if it's 14-0 North Carolina. But that wasn't to be. And like you said, Cade Klubnik played a smart game from there on out, kept it in the hands of his best players. Will Shipley finally showed back up again. Obviously, he's feeling a little bit healthier, and he went for a $126 and a touchdown. Maffa had a touchdown. He added another 84, 85 yards. Shipley had 50 through the air as well. So this is a team that's getting back to doing what we thought they would do: is lean heavily on the run game, lean heavily on Will Shipley, and find some playmakers when you have an opportunity. But the defense has stepped back up as well. But Omarion Hampton, if he doesn't fumble twice in the first half of this game, I think we're talking about a vastly different result. But he did, and you have to give the Clemson some credit on that one. And they get a chance next week to keep South Carolina from becoming bowl eligible. So as frustrating as it's been for Dabo Swinney and Clemson, they can really finish this thing out the right way and try and carry some of that momentum into bowl season, into bowl practices, and then eventually into 2024.
Dave, I want to finish up in the ACC here.
Speaking of bowl season.
Oh, baby. This was a battle between 2 5-5 teams, the winner of which was going to go bowling. Syracuse was looking to become a bowl eligible for the second season in a row for the first time in almost a decade. Meanwhile, Georgia Tech hadn't been bowling since 2018. It was the longest active streak in the ACC. The Yellow Jackets, they did all they needed to do. They looked like they were pulling away, and then Syracuse just turned it on in the second half, the third quarter, and into the fourth quarter. They looked like they were going to get it. They cut the lead. That was at one point 24-10, I believe. And look, they cut it all the way down to a 24-22 deficit. And they tried to go for 2. And really, when Georgia Tech made the play, Clayton Powell-Lee, the safety for Georgia Tech, the honorable mention All-American last year, freshman All-American, that was the moment that it's like, okay, I think Georgia Tech just woke up a little bit because they come out onto the field. There's about 7 minutes and change left in the game, and they run the ball, and then they run the ball again, and then they run the ball again and again and again and again and again and again and again, and they score a touchdown. It was about a 5.5 minute drive. They run the ball 9 consecutive plays. They go the length of the field and they punch it in, and that felt like sort of a cathartic moment for Georgia Tech this season. A very difficult year for the Yellow Jackets, and you could see the emotion that poured out onto the field. If you saw my Twitter at GChapATL, the exuberance and the joy from those student athletes was just a spectacle. It was a sight to see because that bowl game has meant so much to them, and it means so much to that program. Brinke talked about it after the game. I've said it on this podcast many times. The additional bowl practices are so important to building a program. It is critical to building a program. And look, they're going to get those bowl practices. They're going to go to a bowl game for the first time since 2018. Credit to Georgia Tech. Great season for the Yellow Jackets after just some debilitating losses down Bowling Green, down to Boston College. They looked bad at times. They got blown out last week against Clemson. Now they're going bowling after a big win against Syracuse.
Well, look, you're talking about football in the city of Atlanta. We're used to a roller coaster, obviously referring to our quarterback here. But that's what this Georgia Tech season has been. It really has been. Now, you maybe didn't know it exactly what Louisville was going to be when you lost to them to start the season. You felt that was a winnable game. But you're riding high. The loss to Bowling Green, you followed up with a big win over Miami. You drop back down to Boston College. You follow that up with a big win to North Carolina. You're feeling a little bit good heading into Clemson. And Haynes King plays probably his worst game of the year. And now you follow that up with a had-to-get-it game against Syracuse, a win to send yourself to bowl eligibility. This is a game you were up 24-3 in. They were comfortable. They were dominating. And then all of a sudden, it got real scary, as you mentioned. They needed to stop the two-point conversion that you referenced to prevent the tie. 5 minutes and 19 seconds later, 9 plays, 75 yards. It's a touchdown run for Haynes King. And he's kind of found a little bit of that sweet spot, too, between wanting to show off the big arm, but also needing to get it done on the ground. He's a very good runner. He's very good at the run-pass option.
Yeah.
And that's what they've leaned on. It's what they leaned on yesterday to build up the 24-3 lead that they had. It's what they leaned on to close out the game. So, look, it's an up-and-down season. There's some good, there's some bad. But if you take a step back and look at the overall picture, you're talking about a team that is bowl eligible in Brent Key's first season. All the lows, all the highs. This is a overall positive movement for the Georgia Tech program, a movement that the players and head coach Brent Key should be very proud of.
Yeah, and I'm excited because I get to go to a bowl game. So I get to go to the first bowl game on the road. So I'm really.
I just hope for you it's not one of the ones in Orlando.
I don't care. Honestly, at this point, I'll get a free trip. I'll get a trip to Epcot here or something like that. I know.
Or maybe
maybe
it'll be the Bahamas Bowl. Remember, they're moving that to Charlotte.
Ooh.
They're moving it to Charlotte, though. Yeah, sorry.
The Bahamas Bowl in Charlotte. That'll be killer.
Sorry.
I've seen some projections for the Yellow Jackets, which some have included Jacksonville, some have been Boston, Fenway. I think there are a lot of fantastic options on the table for the Yellow Jackets. I don't care. I get to go to a bowl game. As long as it's not too far away or someplace that it's like I really just am unable to get there. Hopefully that's not the case. But I'm really excited. I'm pumped to be covering the Yellow Jackets in their first bowl game since 2018. But Abe, I want to move into the Pac-12 because we have a potentially chaotic finish if one thing happens, and I'll talk about that here when we get into this. But first, I want to talk about UCLA and USC quickly. I just want to say another sloppy USC football game. Makes me think they're the wrong coach in California is on the hot seat. Of course, the news came out that Chip Kelly was fired. He was done. He was going to be allowed to coach out the season. Athletic director Martin Jarman, he denied those rumors after the game that he's on the outs. But I think the win helped solidify his case. Lane Kiffin now is 19 not Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin was 19-7. But Lincoln Riley is now 5-7 in his last 12 games. But what I was saying with Lane Kiffin is he was 19-7 while also dealing with the NCAA sanctions. I don't think that Lincoln Riley has had much more success than what Lane Kiffin did. And all I'm saying is Riley should avoid as many LAX tarmacs as possible.
Well, look, from the UCLA perspective, if you're going to fire the coach. Don't play this game of, but now he's won a couple in a row and maybe we need to rethink our consideration. If you're going to get rid of him, you pull the trigger. If you're not, then you're not. But, so now you're dealing with that aspect and you throw your hands up in the air with the question of now what is the future for Chip Kelly. In terms of USC, this one's frustrating because Caleb Williams played outstanding and you just couldn't score. You couldn't run the ball at all. Your team had a net of 3 rushing yards. And I know obviously you're taking into account Caleb Williams' negative yardage on sacks, stuff like that. But you got to do better Marshawn Lloyd's got to be better. He's a better back than that. And so you got to figure that out. I know you want to play to your strengths and let Caleb Williams do his thing. He had 384 yards and a touchdown, but you couldn't score. No matter what the offensive numbers said about Caleb Williams' day, you couldn't get in the end zone. He did once, but that was just once for Williams. And even that was on a play that was kind of a deep ball where the defensive back he was beat, maybe he tripped, kind of tough to tell. He definitely tried to take out the receiver though, which is kind of funny. Anyways, look, there's no doubt about it. Lincoln Riley has not got this team to where they need to. And the question is just still the defense. Like you're not going to win games without better defenses. You fired your coordinator. And you gave up 38 points to a UCLA offense that has been relatively quiet most of the season. So you got to get your defense settled if you're Lincoln Riley before you expect to have any big successes.
Yeah, and Caleb Williams might be the last time we ever see him. Throws for 384 yards, like you mentioned. He was upstaged a bit by Ethan Garbers, who just came back from injury. He threw for three touchdowns. USC's allowed 34-plus points in 8 straight games. They have a big offseason ahead of them. They have to figure out some things. But somebody who's had a complete inverse of the season is just Arizona in general. They've just been marvelous. Marvelous. They've won their 8th straight game. Noah Fifita continues to roll 253 yards and 3 touchdowns in this game. And injuries, I feel like, have finally caught up with Utah. I think that their whole team is just debilitated with injuries. They've been beat to hell. But a win next week against Arizona State would mark the first 9-win season for Arizona since 1998. It also could potentially keep their bid for a Pac-12 title game alive, and I'm going to get into that here in just a second. But the Wildcats, just an incredible game here.
Yeah, look, Arizona, since making the quarterback change, has just turned into a nightmare for their opponents on both sides of the ball for whatever reason. But yeah, obviously Fifita has played well, and the defense has shown up as well. And Jedd Fisch continues to do a great job. And look, I still want to see Washington, Oregon. But based on how things went, if it does play itself into a situation where Arizona reaches the Pac-12 title game, I don't think they would show up and be miraculously outmatched either. I mean, that's a really good football team. And again, you talk about your identity and figuring stuff out through the course of the season, and they had to with their quarterbacks, and they did. And on the flip side for Utah, obviously things never got rolling the way you wanted to with the Cam Rising news and not having him available at any part of this season. But you seem to have some lightning in a bottle with Sion Vaki at running back, and you just stopped using him. And it didn't feel like it was completely because he became ineffective. Guys got healthier and you stopped using him. He had 4 carries for 10 yards. I mean, you go back to a 2 or 3 week stretch, he was 120, 210, 108, whatever the numbers were. He was tearing it up. And so I'm a little confused about what the game plan was there for Utah. Obviously, some of that became because you stuck with Bryson Barnes at quarterback and maybe you wanted to throw the ball a little bit more. But it's been a disappointing second half to the season for Whittingham, as disappointing as it has been promising for Arizona's Jedd Fisch.
Yeah. Just an interesting game there in general as the Big 12 or Pac-12 continues to.
It was 28-0, man. It was 28-0. I was like, I could not believe it.
Wow. 2 very well coached teams, and I think we saw that specifically. I'm not going to get into what Oregon did. Bo Nix just was an incredible performer in that game. But it is now, after the Oregon State finish, which we're going to discuss here in just a second, it is now down to Oregon and Arizona for the final spot, since there is no head-to-head tiebreaker between the two. All that needs to happen is Oregon needs to win next week against Oregon State, and they are in. If Arizona wins next week against Arizona State, and Oregon loses next week, so Oregon loses next week, and Arizona wins against Arizona State, that would trigger a 3rd tiebreaker, which is then winning percentage versus common opponents based on the order of finish into play. Arizona, with a win against Oregon State and a loss to USC, We'd need the Beavers to finish ahead of the Trojans in the final conference standings. That is going to be your determining factor. It gets into very complicated stuff, and maybe that just shouldn't happen. Oregon should just take care of business against Oregon State and just finish it out the way that we want to see it, and that is with this team playing against Oregon in a rematch of what we saw. Washington, big winners, 22-20. They did it with defense. It was just a night of terror in terms of weather. Michael Penix didn't play super well, but he braved the elements. And look, at the end of the day, he completes 13 passes. 7 of those are Rome Odunze, 100 yards, two touchdowns for the wide receiver. He's clutch, man. He had 2 critical runs that helped keep drives alive, including one of those that went for a touchdown. They've won their last 6 games by 10 points or fewer, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They keep winning, and as long as they are winning football games, I know I picked Oregon State to win this game, largely in part due to the elements. I thought they were going to be able to run the ball a little bit better, but the Washington defense stood tall.
Yeah, and this is a situation where Washington, and maybe this is just my opinion, maybe there's some confirmation bias going on here. I thought Washington struggled with the weather a lot more than Oregon State did. I think this actually would have been a much different game in a dry situation because Washington had guys open, Penix hit them, and they just weren't bringing it in, especially in the first half. The second half, it got a little wonky for Washington. They couldn't do anything on offense. I mean, their drives in the second half were missed field goal, punt, and then the end of the game. They obviously didn't have the ball a ton of time there in the second half, but they didn't get anything going. I mean, they went into halftime with 22 points. They finished the game with 22 points. That's a little concerning, a little bit troubling. Heading into obviously the Apple Cup, but also potentially a rematch against Oregon. But they did what they had to do. And at the end of the day, it has not been pretty for this Washington team since that Oregon win. I have not been impressed really on any single week. That being said, they have found ways, different ways every week, it seems, to get the job done. And you cannot deny that they just went on the road and beat a really good Oregon State team. So it is another feather in the cap of what has been, and for Washington fans, hopefully continues to be an undefeated season, potentially a Pac-12 championship season, and who knows what happens if you can get into the college football playoffs. But they're just not peaking the way you would like to see teams peak at this part of the season heading into what is about to be their biggest games of the year. For Oregon State, on the flip side, you got to find a way to rebound because Oregon is ready for you. They know what they have in front of them. You laid out the scenarios. They need to win this game. They obviously want a rematch with Washington. They've got a Heisman candidate who is playing as well as anyone in the country. Their defense is playing as well as anyone in the country. And they are looking to find their path back to the college football playoffs as well. So there's no time to cry over the spilled milk on this one because Oregon State's got a battle against the Ducks this coming week.
Yeah, and if the Pac-12 wants to reach the college football playoff for the first time since I think 2017, Washington was the last team to do it, I believe, way back in the day. I mean, it just feels like it's been forever since we've seen a team from out west represent the conference. But I think everybody wants to see Washington and Oregon. We're going to get into both of those breakdowns next week, but Washington has continued to play with fire. And I mean, they've done well to not get burned, but how long can they keep that going? I think that's going to be a very interesting topic of conversation here as we finish up the season. So far, so good for the Huskies. They're undefeated. They are a top 5 team right now. We'll see if they get pushed up into that top 4. We're going to discuss our college football playoff rankings and where those stand for us here in just a little bit. But I do want to talk a little bit about the Big Ten. We were going to go a little bit in depth, but we're going a little over. So I want to talk. We just have so many things that we want to talk about, but I need to update everybody on what's going on in the Big Ten. The Iowa Hawkeyes, they get the win 15-13 over Illinois. They locked down the Big Ten West title with the win. Their 5th win this season in which they've scored 20 points or less. No other Power 5 team has more than 2 of such wins. Are you giving them quickly? Are you giving them any shot against Michigan or Ohio State?
Yes, a shot against Michigan, no shot against Ohio State.
Interesting. I think that we're going to get into all of those discussions here coming up in the next couple of weeks. I disagree. I think they've got a good shot against both of them. If they can muck it up enough, I don't think that offense is going to be able to cook against either one of those defenses for Michigan or for Ohio State. I think both of those guys are going to be able to shine. But if they can keep it in the 20s, crazier things have happened. Michigan also goes and gets a win against Maryland, 31-24. That's their 1,000th win in Wolverine history. Bit more drama off the field, bit of drama on the field. They sweated it out a lot closer than a lot of people thought. The Terps came back from a big deficit. They gave up a blocked punt for a touchdown. They had a turnover that went for 6. The blocked punt, though, the punter kicked the ball out of the back of the end zone for a safety. But then they had another safety in the fourth quarter. And that was really the difference in this game. At the end of the day, the Michigan offense didn't look very good. It looked like they were looking ahead to next week a little bit, 291 yards of offense. Second week in a row that J.J. McCarthy really has not looked very comfortable. I don't really have many thoughts about this game just in general. Michigan is by far the better football team. Maryland gave them a game. I don't know who Michigan is still. I have no idea. They haven't played anybody of worth. Their best win of the season is Penn State, a team that also cannot really play offense. Abe, do you have any quick thoughts on this one?
Well, just look, this game was 23-3, and then Maryland scored before the half and scored right after the half, and all of a sudden you're in a battle, and they had the ball. Maryland did down a possession with a chance to take the lead, and then Michigan's defense stepped up. I agree with you, though. The lack of offense from Michigan is concerning. Now it feels like if you could slow down Blake Corum and the Michigan Edwards and the Michigan run game, I don't trust McCarthy or those receivers or tight ends to go out and win you a game. And that's concerning because I think you're going to have to score against Ohio State. And if you face Iowa, I think they do a pretty good job of stopping that run. So Michigan has not shown me what they needed to impress.
Well, that win for Michigan sets up a winner-take-all situation for the game against Ohio State. Ohio State, of course, gets the win 37-3 against PJ Fleck and the Minnesota Golden Gophers. No real contest in that game. Minnesota just isn't a lot of anything right now. I know PJ Fleck earlier in the season said that Michigan's the best team he's ever coached against. Well, another good team beat him pretty handedly. But it does set up a winner-take-all next week in a game that we are absolutely going to be discussing here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. And Abe, I do want to move into the Big 12 quickly here because Oklahoma gets the win against BYU. They don't look comfortable in the process, but they are 31-24 winners over Brigham Young. Any comments on that one real quick?
No, it was a fun game to watch at noon. Very surprising. I know Dylan Gabriel got benched at one point. I don't know what's going on with the Sooners, but they are far, far removed from the team that beat Texas.
Yeah, pretty much. And then Kansas State, of course, they are winners against Kansas for the 7th year in a row. Will Howard had 3 touchdowns in that game. Kansas's Devin Neal had 3 rushing touchdowns. But this loss likely ends the Jayhawks' hopes of finishing the season ranked in the top 25 for the first time since 2007. It also keeps alive Kansas State's hope for a potential Big 12 title berth, as did Oklahoma's win. It sets up a very interesting tiebreaker that I'm going to get into here in just a second. Abe, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Look, Kansas was down to their 3rd-string quarterback. They still fought and played pretty well. This was a very close game against Kansas State. I like Kansas State quite a bit coming into this game, but with a 3rd-string quarterback, Kansas did well, even in a loss.
And I was very impressed with what Texas did as well. 26-16 winners against Iowa State. I picked Iowa State as an upset special on our show, College Football Game Time, that airs every single Saturday from 8 until noon on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. Find it wherever you find your podcasts, on the Odyssey app live. But Iowa State gave them all they could handle. Texas only led 6-3 at halftime, but Texas was able to pull away and get its first 10-win regular season since 2009. A win next week assures them of their first Big 12 title berth since 2009. Just a great game from Texas in general. Quinn Ewers played really, really well. 281 yards, 2 touchdowns for the quarterback. C.J. Baxter, I do want to give him his flowers really quickly.
Yeah.
117 rushing yards. Huge performance in the absence of Jonathan Brooks, who tore his ACL last week. Rocco Becht threw for 323 yards for Iowa State and 2 touchdowns. I think that's a glaring Texas weakness, Abe. This is a secondary that cannot stop the pass. And if you want to be playing in the college football playoff and you want to find success in the college football playoff, you need to be able to stop the pass. They won the turnover battle. They did all they needed to do. The rushing defense stuffed the Iowa State rushing attack, held with only 9 rushing yards, an average of less than 0.5 yards per carry. Overall, just a big win for Texas.
Yeah, look, the big question was who's going to step up in place of Jonathan Brooks, and C.J. Baxter was the obvious name, and Baxter showed up. 20 carries, 117 yards. He gets the job done. Look, Texas held Iowa State to only 9 rushing yards when you factor in a couple sacks there to Rocco Becht, but you nailed it. You got to do better against the pass. Too many teams are going to be coming in being able to throw the ball. Again, if you matched up Alabama now with Texas, I would not like their chances. I know they won week 2, but these are 2 different teams. Texas does get Quinn Ewers back for their second game, but they still continue to just kind of like Washington a little bit. They're just kind of getting by. They're not overly impressive. But as of now, they get one more win next week. They'll be in the Big 12 title game.
And as for who they will be playing in that game, Oklahoma, Kansas State, and Oklahoma State are in a 3-way tie for second place. Iowa State has been eliminated from the Big 12 title berth, a potential Big 12 title berth with that loss, albeit it was a long shot as just in general for them to make a berth, just based off of the season that they've had this year and the losses that they had to whom they had them to. But it sets up like this. Texas, if they win out, they're in. Oklahoma State, if they win out, they're in due to their wins against Oklahoma and Kansas State. Oklahoma needs to win out, plus it needs Kansas State and Oklahoma State to lose once. Kansas State needs to win out, and it needs Oklahoma State and Oklahoma to both lose once. They play Iowa State next weekend. Oklahoma plays TCU. And look, at the end of the day, Oklahoma State should have the lead in this game. They have the biggest wins. They need a little bit of, but these other guys need a little bit of help. Texas, I don't think cares too much about who they play. Maybe they want to play Oklahoma. I think all 3 of these teams are kind of ranked. I don't think the ranking of either of those 3 teams is really going to help Texas's resume all that much. But of course, we did see Oklahoma beat Texas earlier in the season, and a win there would help their resume just a little bit because they get some revenge for a loss that they sustained earlier in the season. So I guess they want to see Oklahoma just for that reason. But at the end of the day, if they end up seeing Oklahoma State and they shut them down and win, they should be in the college football playoff.
I don't know about that, but I wouldn't go that far. But
I would think a few different things.
Yeah, I think Oklahoma State's probably the matchup they'd want just in terms of on-field. They have a pretty good run defense. You stop Ollie Gordon, you beat Oklahoma State. But yeah, I don't. To your point, I don't think any of those 3 teams that you mentioned really give me too much fear. Probably Kansas State than Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, but they seem to be the biggest long shot.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. But quickly, I want to move into our college football playoff rankings where we finish up here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. Implications of the Jordan Travis injury. I don't know if they're going to be felt this week. They might be felt next week or the week after. But real quick, I just want to roll through this. I think we're going to agree on number 1. I'm just going to start there. University of Georgia is your number 1 team. Period. Sorry. Yep. That's just where I stand. My number 2 is Ohio State. Do you disagree?
Yep. No, that's what I got.
3 is Michigan.
Yep.
4 is Washington.
Yeah, and let me just say this in regards to the Jordan. I don't think Florida State's getting downgraded because of the Jordan Travis injury. I think Washington's getting upgraded because they went on the road to a top 15 team and won. They've got a number of ranked wins the past couple of weeks. So I want to clear up, but I'm not dropping Florida State. I'm rising Washington. I don't know if you feel the same, but I felt that needed to be made clear. It's not penalizing Florida State for being without Jordan Travis. Washington has a resume now that is better than FSU's.
I could not possibly agree more. Both are undefeated. That's just the nature of having 5 undefeated teams. It's just where we are. One team isn't going to get left out of the top 4. Just where we stand right now, of course, we have the matchup next week between Ohio State and Michigan that's going to make this a lot more simple as the season goes on. But this is just where we stand right now. Abe, I completely agree. I think it's the win against Oregon State that really puts them over the top. They proved something again to me. I got to get it through my head at some point, but they just continue to get it done on the football field. Number 6 for me is Oregon.
Sure.
Texas is number 7 for me, just based off of that win that they had earlier this season over Alabama.
For now, sure. I mean, look. Now. If you're asking me if they played a game, who's winning, it's Alabama. But I can give Texas the ranking right now. Sure.
Like, I just want to make this clear to everybody. This is not a power ranking. This is a resume ranking. And this is how we think that the committee is going to rank it, just based off of everything. I think I agree with you. If they played again, I think that Alabama would absolutely win this football game. They have been a much, much improved team over the second half of the season. The SEC West really had a golden opportunity to beat them. And they just whiffed time and again.
Yeah.
Number 8 is Alabama. Number 9 is Louisville for me. So I think we pretty much agree.
Yeah, I mean, the committee had Missouri at 9. If they want to jump Louisville, that's fine. If they want to keep Missouri there, doesn't change anything to me. But yeah, I'm pretty in line with that.
At that point. Yeah. I don't think either one of those teams is really going to be pushing up. No. We've never seen a team jump that far in the history of the college football playoff. The only one that I could see potentially jumping that far is Alabama, because they would have a win over the University of Georgia in the SEC title game. They would, of course, have to win next week. But Abe Gordon, that's it for us here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. Huge week that we just reacted to. Thank you so much for joining us. I've got my timestamps below, so make sure that you're jumping to wherever you want to talk. Listen in. We do that every single week, every Monday and every Thursday. Make sure you are listening in. Set that notification. Make sure you hit that subscribe button below, because we're giving you all the college football action and reactions that you need and love. Coming up next week, we have Rivalry Week. It is the best week of the college football season. It is my absolute favorite. We have the game. We have the Iron Bowl. We have clean, old-fashioned heat. We have everything that you could possibly want. The Apple Cup, the Governor's Cup, every single thing that you could talk about, because this is a tremendously important week of college football, not just for two teams who are playing each other, two teams that don't like each other across the country, but national ramifications for who's going to be playing in conference title games and eventually in the college football playoff Final Four, in the final edition of the 14 playoff. It sets up for a wild finish. We have 5 undefeated teams. We're not going to have 5 undefeated teams next week. And this is really the first time that we've pretty much been able to say that all season long. And I am very excited to get into it with Abe Gordon right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. But like I said, that's it for us. Make sure you're tuning in on Thursday, because we are going to be breaking all of those games down. But for now, my name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. Thanks so much for listening. We are College Football Overtime.